My name is Josh French. I have the pleasure of serving as the director of Cokesbury Students. And every now and then, I get to spend Sunday mornings right here with you. And I think this is neat. I mean, this is pretty cool. Hey, thanks. I appreciate the opportunities to just be here. And man, it gets to a point where it's just like, I hope I do a good job. And I think that as someone who got out of bed to come here for this, not knowing that it was going to be me, that you also hope I do a good job. And I know that from experience, because the last time I was up here, a person who I would now call a friend and who is now a very committed small group leader for us, found me after the service. She said, Josh, I have been working on getting my neighbor to come with me to church for so long. And after months of asking her to come, she finally came. And then you walked up there. And I said, girl, I am so sorry. This ain't our regular pastor. But you did a good job for like a youth guy and all that. I said, okay, cool. Great job bringing a friend. We talk about that in student ministry all the time. We need to be invitational. I am a youth guy, yes. You know what? You said you did good. I'm just going to carry that with me. So thank you so much. So let's get on the same page. I want to do good more than you want me to do good. We're on an adventure together. Let's have fun. We are wrapping up our Keep It Simple series, which if you haven't been here, I want to try to catch you up real quick. That the idea is just to take a simple approach to what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And really that boils down to three practices. We need to love God, love people, and share hope. We are people created to love God. And the more we learn to trust God, the greater our capacity to love God will become. And as our love of God grows, so will our capacity and willingness to love other people. So as we get to this third point, it's our job to share hope. We take that love and we share hope. And I think sharing hope might be the weirdest of the three. Loving God and other people sound pretty straightforward, and sharing hope should be straightforward, but the more I think about it, the tougher the task sounded. It's like one of those words that you just kind of say over and over and over, and it starts to sound weird, and then by the end of it, you don't even know how to spell it anymore. Like roads. Spend an afternoon saying the word roads, and you will put yourself in a mental pretzel. I think I'm a pretty hopeful guy, so I feel like this should be pretty easy. I don't want to be the glass half empty guy. I don't want to be a pessimist. I don't want to assume the worst in people or circumstances. I generally believe that in the end, everything will just kind of work out. Not maybe in every ideal circumstance or situation or the way that I had it drawn up in my mind, but in a way where we're going to be okay. Like we will get to do the next thing. Like yesterday, when I woke up and our garage was flooded because our hot water heater had a leak. It's pretty tough to be hopeful with wet socks holding a 1-year-old and you're both making that same dumb face at the other one like, I don't know, what do you want to do? I don't know. Nothing in my adult life had prepared me for being an adult with a hot water heater all over your garage floor. There is no class for that. But I think for the most part, we've got it figured out. We're on our way to recovery. And I think hope is one of those intangibles that maybe it seems harder to find or more difficult to feel the older that we get. If we asked everyone in the building the same question about being hopeful in this present moment, my best guess is that the answers would gradually decline as the age of the answerer got older. I find myself in the unique position to be the father of 2 young children, surrounded by 5th through 12th graders at work, and myself trying very hard to be an adult. Hope when you are a child is easy. I get to see that in my soon-to-be 6-year-old's face all the time. They get pumped over new crayons. When was the last time you got excited over a coloring device? A new stuffed animal, a donut. Although that one that probably applies to everybody. But my daughter has told me so many times, Daddy, this is the best day ever. Like, I don't even believe her anymore. I'm just like, okay, well, wait till next Tuesday. Wait, see what we got there. But that's hope for her. Joy in this moment is going to last forever. I know she's hopeful about the future because she's already told me she wants to be a veterinarian, a librarian, and a Lady Vol. I don't know how we're gonna do all three of those things at the same time, but now's not the time to figure that out. Now is the time to pump my fist and go, yeah, you go, girl. Let's do it. I don't know how, but yeah, sounds expensive. For students, I think students are a largely hopeful group too. Our 56ers just love the opportunity to yell and to run. They get excited over what's next, a trip, an event, a chance to be wild. 5th and 6th grade students might be the most joyful and life-giving demographic in this church. Spend some time with a 56er and you will know unbridled joy. Middle school students are regularly some of the first to join in on something silly, to say something absurd, or to just enjoy being here and, not to brag, think this is cool. They are at a point in life where they're trying to figure it out. Where do I belong? What do I want to do? What's going to make me feel good? And yes, sometimes we get some really weird decisions from that last question, but I've yet to meet a middle schooler who didn't think something better was in front of them. High school students are not only thinking about life more critically than they were just a couple of years ago, but they often try to make it better. Their brains are processing more and faster than it's ever happened before in their life, and I would argue that they're having to do it much earlier than life than you or I did. They're trying to figure out where they fit into this world, and if they don't see a spot that's just right, a lot of them are willing to work and create something new for themselves and their friends. They're working out who they want to be and what they can do and believe in to give themselves a better, brighter future. But when it comes to being a grown-up, hope can seem a little harder to find. Why wouldn't it be more difficult? We've got more experience, we've lived more life, we've seen more tough things. Turn on the news, there's a lot to process and a lot of unanswered questions. And speaking of unanswered questions, when you try to understand the generations behind you, that seems like an impossible task. The internet rarely does anything to inspire hope. Aside from a few tweets with puppies, and one I saw this weekend where a chimpanzee was reunited with her new baby chimp, there's not a lot of hope on the internet. Your friends and that weird uncle you have on Facebook, no thanks. Instagram is filled with gorgeous pictures of people and homes and clothes and vacations that can sometimes be inspiring, sure, but oftentimes leave us jealous that our life doesn't look like that. If you are of a certain age, you were on the internet before your parents and before your children. There was a time when going online was kind of okay because it took so much effort to do it, we couldn't do it all the time. You just played fantasy football or customized a MySpace page or got in an AOL chat room and then got out because it was super weird. And then one day your dad sends you your real friends a friend request on Facebook. He doesn't know how to act cool online and the internet isn't a safe place anymore. As we age, the real world and the online world, which our younger folks live in, doesn't always do a super good job of sharing hope or inspiring hope or encouraging hope. But if we're followers of Jesus, it's our job to find ways to share hope. And if we're going to share hope, I think we need to tell better stories. I told this to a younger youth worker who was a couple years behind me, and he was asking some questions. I said, man, you got to tell better stories about what you do and about what your ministry is. And the key to telling a good story is the ups and downs in the middle part. A story that starts good and ends good isn't really much of a story. Sure, we can be happy about it, that it's all good, but is it inspiring? For example, like if I told you that there were two attractive 20-somethings, they met on a bus, an old man objected to their relationship, you probably wouldn't watch that movie, would you? But If I told you that one was a hotshot LAPD SWAT officer named Jack, played by Keanu Reeves, and who heroically boards a speeding bus now unfortunately driven by a suspended license Annie, played by Sandra Bullock, and the old man objecting to their existence, played by Dennis Hopper, says, "Pop quiz, hotshot, there's a bomb on a bus, and once the bomb goes 50 miles an hour, the bomb is armed. If it drops below 50, it blows up. What do you do? What do you do?" Now that is a story. Whew. Hopefully one you've already heard. It's not the pleasant endings to the story that by themselves inspire hope. It's the parts where hardships are conquered, where personal demons are defeated, where just when you think it's over, there's life. The bad and the weird and the tough parts in the middle of our stories are what make them great. If we're going to be people that share hope, we can't just skip over the hard parts. We have a student that when I met him early in my time here, he was already a great kid. He had a solid attitude. He was a willing participant. He had a ton of friends. He was not always the center of attention, but he was always just kind of around it. Since he was in middle school, you could have a great conversation with him. Now that he's almost done with high school, he's the same dude. Easygoing, super easy to love, always has friends around him, fearless when he tries new things. He found a skill and a hobby that he's incredibly talented in and he really enjoys. And one day he's gonna make money at it, like that's how good he is. And if you know this kid, you know he's a good story. But what you may not hear about is how often he feels alone, how often he felt left out, how often he feels so low that at one point considered taking his own life. But if you're going to know all of that, then you also need to know how regularly he was willing to talk about those negative feelings, how often he would put in work, years of digging himself out of despair. You need to hear about how he and I celebrate every year on the anniversary he had his last suicidal thought. What was once the darkest moment in this young man's life is now a holiday that we celebrate together. Not only was he able to overcome all of that, but just a few months ago sat in front of a group of students and shared that story. His story is a good story, but when you hear the middle parts, it's a story of love. It's a story of belonging. It becomes a story of hope. When we want to share hope, we need to tell better stories. We need to be willing to be vulnerable. Don't skip over the middle stuff. Be the one in the room that's brave enough to say, "Yo, I was there too. I kind of know what that feels like." Don't just tell us about the beauty and the end, but include the ugly parts in the middle. Because for most of us, maybe that's where we are. And maybe you're where we're trying to get to. The hope in the end. If you grew up going to church in the South, maybe you're familiar with the term evangelism. And maybe that's a really cringy word for some. And perhaps that evokes imagery of televangelists or tent revivals or judgment houses or a whole host of other things. I don't know. Unfortunately, I do think that the church has overcomplicated the idea of evangelism for a really long time. In my youth, I was exposed to a brand of evangelism that had a script and a flow chart, and basically it was a system to evangelize people you had just met. You would wear a pin on your shirt, and in theory, someone would say, "Hey, what's up with that pin?" And that would open the door for someone like me to very casually break the ice with, "So, do you know what happens to your soul when you die?" If you've never been dropped off at a random laundromat with other youth and forcibly struck up a conversation with an old man waiting on his bed sheets to get out of the dryer and opened with, "So, what do you think happens to your soul when you die, Henry?" Then, did you go to youth group in the early 2000s? Evangelism, or more simply, the sharing of the gospel of Jesus Christ, is simply sharing your story. I think I would have been way more effective with that guy in the laundromat had I just tried to get to know him and hear who he was and where he'd been and where he wanted to go. And maybe at some point he would become interested in me and I could share a story. We could become friends. Evangelism doesn't need to be a system. It's not a script. It's your experience and your words with your voice. But if we're going to be known as the people who share hope, we have to start telling better stories. And if we're going to share hope, we need to follow Jesus. And I know that's such like a no-duh, like talking point, like you get it. We need to follow Jesus to share hope. Okay, but consider what it means to follow Jesus. We trust in God with our career, our family, our money. And as our trust increases, so does our love for God. We love people, all people, even if we're super not into them, we still need to love them. We still need eyes to see people as Jesus did, as valuable, worthy, and lovable. But from our love, we can start to do other things. Like we can start to forgive people. And maybe that's the toughest one. Not because forgiveness is hard, but because unforgiveness can feel kind of good. Maybe, like in a naughty. It can feel good to be angry. Anger is an emotion that can give us a dose of courage that maybe we lack at times. Unforgiveness can evoke such strong emotions that hatred can keep dead people alive. Whew. There's a reason Darth Vader went to the dark side of the Force. Because hatred and anger and unforgiveness can make you feel much more powerful. But unforgiveness is also a killer. Unforgiveness only leads to death of our soul because unforgiveness is what separates us from the one who gives us life. If we're going to share hope, we need to follow Jesus and forgive. And from our love of God, we start to do other things like serve. We can begin to give to those in need. We can be a helping hand to a friend. We can do big or small things that simply make the moment or the day of someone else a little bit easier. When we serve people, we remind them that they are not alone. When we serve people, we remind them they are valuable. When we serve people, we remind them they matter. There's a story in John where Jesus washes his disciples' feet. They didn't understand why a man of his status and stature would take on the role of a slave. Jesus told them, as I, your teacher, have washed your feet, so should you wash others' feet. And as Richard Foster wrote in his book, Celebration of Discipline, the spiritual authority of Jesus is an authority not found in a title, but in a towel. The risen Christ beckons us to the ministry of the towel. If we're going to share hope, we need to follow Jesus and we need to serve one another. And from our love of God, we start to do other things like practice kindness. We talk about this all the time in student ministry. Actually, this and the next two are student ministry things. But how would we talk about this a lot? How would your world be different if we were just nice to other people? Like, kindness sounds a lot like just be a good person. Just go and be good. And like, it kind of is. But also, that's who Jesus was. He was approachable. He welcomed children. He was patient with people. He sought others out for conversation. His whole ministry was built on an invitation. The man did miraculous works on the whole idea of inviting people in. Like, you get to be here. You get to do this and join this and be part of this. What can be more kind than seeing someone as a valuable person? Not for what they've done for you, but just because of who they are. We don't need a culture that only welcomes folks if they check certain boxes. We have to cultivate a culture that just welcomes. If we're going to share hope, we need to follow Jesus with a radical kindness. And from our love of God, we start to do things like practice compassion. Again, makes you a good person, but also Jesus was the example. Compassion isn't just shouting thoughts and prayers, T's and P's. Compassion isn't encouraging someone with grandiose platitudes like, hang in there, or I think it's time to move on. Compassionate people are patient, and compassionate people are listeners, and compassionate people actually hang in there with you during a tough time. Compassionate people are natural wanderers of those that are hurting and willing to spend time in the junk with you. It's not having all the right answers that makes you compassionate. It's simply showing grace to those that need it. If we're going to share hope, we need to follow Jesus' example of compassion. And from our love of God, we will start to be more curious. Have you ever sat with just a naturally curious person? It's incredible because they only want to talk about you. They just ask questions about you. It's wonderful. They seem to only want to hear your stories. The thing I love about curious people is they actually seem to be interested. I'm fine is an unsatisfactory response to a naturally curious person. But also, how are you isn't a good enough question for them either. Curious people want to know your stories. They don't ask yes/no questions. They embrace your feelings and might even slip in a, tell me more about that. People that are curious want to understand your experience. They're not just listening for answers. I think Jesus' habit of answering questions with more questions wasn't him being bad at conversations. I think it was about him being naturally curious about the people he was talking to. Jesus would challenge his disciples and often made them think more critically instead of what was directly in front of them. I think people that practice curiosity are the ones that change the world and make their relationships feel so valuable. If we're going to share hope, we need to follow Jesus by being curious. And more than any of the things I just mentioned that flow from our lives when we follow Jesus, to first get there, it requires an answer to an invitation. It's not all of these things, but it's actually way over here at the beginning. That we will never be able to give what we don't have. If we don't have money, you can't give it. You know this. If we have no time, you can't give it. No love, can't give it. No joy, can't share it. If I do not believe in the hope found in a relationship with Jesus, how could I possibly pass that along to you? But the good news of the good news is that all of this is offered to you. These gifts are free, but the gospel of Jesus Christ requires a response. And the invitation at the very beginning is there. What are we going to do with it? And if we're going to share hope, we have to point people to Jesus. We're going to end with the key to this whole thing. To share hope, we simply point people to Jesus. Those are really good stories we're going to tell. I know that we're not going to leave out any of the messy parts, that we're going to be vulnerable with people. And we're going to talk about how we got out of the situation that we're in. And we did find hope in the end, and life is back on track. But if our stories that are all about triumph and victory and recovery or feeling alive, those are going to be great. But to be stories of hope, they need to point people to Jesus. If we're going to be kind and compassionate and curious, but in the end, people can't see Jesus in us, we've got more work to do. I told you a long time ago, I really wanted to do a good job today. But in the end, if I didn't point you to Jesus, I've let you down. And maybe it'll be today. Maybe it'll be next week. I don't know when, but at some point, I'm going to disappoint someone here. These students, as many of them as there are, I'm going to let somebody down because I, to a fault, am 100% human. But if I spend my time pointing them to Jesus, maybe I did okay. I think I work with the most talented group of people I've ever been associated with here. But at some point, we're going to disappoint you. I believe in the mission and vision of Cokesbury Church more concretely than any other organization. But at some point, we as a collective are not going to be able to meet your needs. If we're really going to share hope, we have to point people to Jesus. I love what Paul said in Romans. And this is how we're going to end because I couldn't write anything better than this. This is Paul. Romans 5, verses 1 through 5. They'll be on the screen. Paul writes, "Therefore, since we have been made right in God's sight by faith, we have peace with God because of what Jesus Christ, our Lord, has done for us. Because of our faith, Christ has brought us into this place of undeserved privilege where we now stand, and we confidently and joyfully look forward to sharing God's glory. We can rejoice, too, that when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance. And endurance develops strength of character, and character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. And this hope will not lead to disappointment, for we know how dearly God loves us, because he has given us the Holy Spirit to fill our hearts with love. May we be people who share hope with our stories, the good parts and the bad. May we be people who share hope because we long to follow Jesus. And we follow Jesus, and that love for Jesus causes us to do a whole host of other things that only builds our community stronger and better. And may we be people who share hope by pointing others to Jesus. That look, I don't have all the answers, but I know who does. I can't be with you all the time, but I know who'll never leave you. May we be people who share hope because our hearts are filled with his love. Amen.